Our reading on Sunday, which I reference in the sermon, was a letter from Benjamin Franklin, circa 1750-something, 1753, in which he talked about the recent influx of German immigrants into the colonies, into Pennsylvania, and he shared his concerns that these immigrants were not learning the English language. They were bringing their own German printing presses and their German education system, and he was very concerned that the unique Anglo-Saxon, English-British nature of the colonies could be lost with this cultural infusion of Germanness. So it was a reminder that these questions have persisted for a very long time, and Doug Mooter was our reader for Sunday and shared with us about that. So when you hear that reference, that's what that is referring to. So I'd like to begin with a note about today's sermon. I've said before that despite all of the chaos and conflict in our current political climate, or perhaps because of it, I don't intend for our Sunday services to become overly driven by current events. I hope that what we talk about here, rooted as it is in timeless and enduring values, is always relevant. We always want to be relevant. And I believe our Unitarian Universalist values are needed in the world now more than ever. And that said, I do not aspire to give hot takes. I think if anything, we are all drowning in hot takes and 24/7 commentary. We don't need more of it on Sunday morning. Which is all to say that I'd been meaning to talk to you all about today's topic for a while now, but when we put it on the schedule for Sunday, November 30th, which we did over a month ago, it was not in response to any particular event. But then in the last week, after the tragic shooting of the National Guard members in Washington, D.C., there's been yet another escalation in the extremism of this administration's immigration policies and its rhetoric around who belongs here. And so unfortunately, today's sermon feels more relevant than ever. So no, the original genesis of this sermon came from a rather unlikely place, or at least an unlikely place for me, and that was the Department of Homeland Security's Facebook page. This is not a place where I normally spend a lot of my time. But one evening, not too long ago, I found myself pouring through the posts on the DHS Facebook feed with this growing mixture of fascination and horror. And I'm pretty sure that I landed there on that Facebook page because of an advertisement that was recruiting for ICE, Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. Now, you may know ICE from their work smashing car windows in Home Depot parking lots, surrounding and kidnapping university students on their way to school, body slamming women in courthouse hallways, and on one notable occasion, rappelling from helicopters in full combat gear to terrorize families in a Chicago apartment complex in the middle of the night. Right? The ICE greatest hits reel is long and impressive. But anyway, ICE is hiring. And at least one of their ads randomly popped up in my Facebook newsfeed, which brought me to DHS. Now, if you go to the DHS Facebook page, you will see a lot of strange things. You will see hyper-macho, militaristic ads for why you should join ICE and what glorious adventures await you if you do, with much fetishizing of guns, helicopters, attack dogs, searchlights, and did I mention guns, all set to a driving hard rock beat. You will see many posts celebrating ICE arrests and conflating immigration with dangerous criminality, when the reality is immigrants are less likely to commit crime than the general population, and 70% of people at least detained by ICE have committed no crimes whatsoever. No crimes whatsoever. And remember, too, that when ICE talks about crimes, they include traffic stops, petty misdemeanors, technical visa violations. Which is not to say that ICE should be detaining anyone. That's a separate conversation, but let's at least start with the truth. ICE is not detaining the worst of the worst. They are mostly detaining people just living their lives, and by people we mean brown people, who the Supreme Court recently said ICE can explicitly target for being brown people. And they do, but I digress. On the DHS Facebook page, you will find a lot of cruel, jokey memes mocking the suffering of the people who ICE detains, and you will find cruel, jokey memes mocking their critics. A recent DHS tweet, and this is true, contains these words: "Womp womp, cry all you want, these," unkind word for detained immigrants, "aren't getting released." And the post concluded, "Get a job, you imbecilic morons." This is an official statement of the U.S. government on a U.S. government publication. And if the culture of an organization is set at the top, this is the culture on display at DHS: cruel and bullying. Imagine how that impacts the people who apply to work there and how it shapes their behavior once they're hired. But again, I digress, because no, the strangest thing on the DHS Facebook page is what you see layered in between the helicopters and the machine guns and the cruel jokes and the macho music. There are so many images of American pioneers. White pioneers, needless to say, settling the nation. There's a company of white cowboys, Rough Riders, charging across the prairie, shooting at an unseen enemy, presumably a non-white enemy given this point in history. There's a Norman Rockwell-esque painting of white children playing football in a suburban yard. There's a close-up of a bottle of Coca-Cola sitting on a Ford Bronco. There are many images of white people with flags sort of staring out into the wilderness of the new world. Then some more cowboys and some more pioneers. And here are examples of the captions that go with these images. "Restore America. Bring her back. We can return. Protect the West. Protect your homeland. Defend your culture. For our country, for our culture, for our way of life." In one memorable instance, DHS posted the painting American Progress by John Gast. It's a very famous painting depicting white settlers crossing the prairie, sort of led by the spirit of liberty, while frightened Native Americans are fleeing their advance. It is one of the classic images of Manifest Destiny. And the caption beneath it says, "A heritage to be proud of, a homeland worth defending." In another post, DHS posted a painting showing a white pioneer couple cradling a newborn baby from inside a covered wagon, sort of recreating the image of the Nativity. The painting is called "New Life in a New Land" by Morgan Weisling, and the caption reads, "Remember your homeland's heritage." So the heritage language felt a little out of place to me on a DHS website, so I did a little more Googling around, and that was how I learned about something called a Heritage American. And in particular, you might check out an article in The Atlantic from October by Allie Breland called, "Are You a Heritage American?" And Heritage Americans, it turns out, is a term that is used by some far-right thinkers to describe, essentially, Americans who were here at the time of the Civil War or before, and their descendants. These are the Heritage Americans. Now, it does not technically refer exclusively to white people, right? Some black people and some Native American people would qualify as Heritage Americans by this definition. But in practice, as one far-right author, C.J. Ingle, quoted in Breland's article said, the word is intended to express, quote, the domination and preeminence of the European-derived peoples, their institutions, and their way of life. Or, as another far-right author and podcaster, Scott Greer, confesses, it sounds better to the public to say Heritage Americans than to say white people when talking about who is authentically American. Because that is what is at issue in this conversation. Who gets to be American? Who is welcome? Who belongs? Now, one vision, the vision lifted up by the Statue of Liberty, is that America is an idea and an ideal. Right? Abraham Lincoln spoke of a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men, today we would say all people, are created equal. Jefferson spoke of an inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Lincoln again spoke of government by the people, of the people, for the people. And Dr. King dreamed of a nation where all people would be judged by the content of their character. These ideas and others constitute the American ideal. And one vision of America promises that anyone who subscribes to these ideals is welcome here. And it imagines an America of any race, ethnicity, creed, or national origin bound by these sacred ideals. Well, in July, in a speech at the Claremont Institute, Vice President J.D. Vance explicitly pushed back on this vision. America, he said, is not just an idea, it is a group of people with a shared history and a common culture. Now, I will readily concede that no nation is just an idea, right? And there has always been a worthy strand of thought within conservatism that points out the importance of real human relationships, of genuine affection and common interest, rooted in a time and a place that build strong communities. And I'm thinking of thinkers like Edmund Burke in this vein. But Vice President Vance is going a little further with this idea. He gives the example in his speech of violent white nationalists and anti-Semites. In his words, people the Anti-Defamation League would label as domestic extremists, violent white nationalists and anti-Semites. And he says of these people that if their ancestors fought in the Civil War, then, quote, they have a lot more claim over America than the people who say that they don't belong. It is an odd point for the vice president to choose to make, right? Vance lays out a hierarchy of Americanness where being here longer, being here before the Civil War, being a heritage American, for lack of a better word, trumps all of that other stuff about liberty and equality and American ideals. And further along in the speech, Vance posits, he worries, that American institutions are currently too weak to allow those bonds of affection and social cohesion to form across diversity. And so immigration becomes a threat to our national fabric. He says, you cannot swap 10 million people from anywhere else in the world and expect for America to remain unchanged. Now, why America should remain unchanged is a question that could be asked. But here Vance is plainly suggesting that immigrants in sufficient numbers are a threat to the American way of life itself. Which immigrants? Well, Vance says the founders of our country understood that our shared qualities, our heritage, our values, our manners and customs confer a special and indispensable advantage. Which qualities? Presumably the qualities, manners, and customs the heritage conferred by having been here before the Civil War. And Vance says, I believe one of the most pressing problems for us to face as statesmen is to redefine the meaning of American citizenship in the 21st century. What does it mean to be an American in 2025, the vice president asks. And his answer suggests that a central part of the answer to that question, what does it mean to be an American, is a vaguely defined collection of manners and customs that make up an American heritage. I guess you know it when you see it, but if you fought in the Civil War, then you definitely have it. So what qualities are desirable has often been contested in our history, right? As we see from the letter from Ben Franklin in our reading, where he argues that indiscriminate German immigration could destroy colonial America's uniquely English culture. Oftentimes in our history, most of the time, what is being contested is really about whiteness, about who gets to be counted white and how whiteness might be protected and preserved. And I don't want to overstate my case here. I'm not suggesting that J.D. Vance is a white nationalist or that he is arguing for white nationalism. He himself plays within the boundary of reasonableness. He says he doesn't have an answer to the question of what it means to be an American. He's just asking questions. But Vance isn't speaking in a vacuum, right? His boss is the guy who launched his political career by claiming that Barack Obama wasn't an American. The guy who said immigrants were poisoning the blood of our country. The guy who claimed that Haitian immigrants were eating their neighbors' cats and dogs, presumably badly failing that manners and customs test for belonging. And that was a rumor that Vance himself also propagated about eating pets, playing off the vilest of old tropes of racism and xenophobia. And if Vance occasionally flirts with racism, there are other high-placed people in the administration, people like White House advisor Stephen Miller, who are in fact extremely entangled with white nationalism, to put it mildly. And you can see the Southern Poverty Law Center website for a write-up on Stephen Miller and who he is and what he's about. The entire administration has become quite expert at throwing out plausibly deniable dog whistles that imply, without explicitly saying, America is a nation of white Europeans for white Europeans and their descendants. And in that context, Vance's question, what does it mean to be an American in 2025, sounds less like an exercise in political philosophy and more like a threat. Particularly when the administration is challenging the long-established constitutional definition of birthright citizenship, is threatening to denaturalize naturalized citizens, and has even suggested it might deport American citizens. Which brings us back to the Department of Homeland Security. On October 14th, DHS tweeted out a one-word post on social media. That one word was remigrate. Remigrate. Remigrate is another one of those vague and mushy words with some plausible deniability built into it. When the press reached out to DHS for a comment, what do you mean about this remigrate tweet? A spokesperson for DHS responded in their charmingly bullying and abusive style, "Is the English language too difficult for you?" they asked the reporter, before sending them the Webster's Dictionary definition of the word. DHS claims that this single-word post, remigrate, is a call for immigrants who are here without authorization to self-deport. That's their claim. But the term remigration, like Heritage American, has a particular pedigree. It is a word that became popular in European white nationalist movements in the 2010s, and it refers to the idea that the only way to save Western civilization is to preserve its white character. And the only way to do that is to encourage, one way or another, all non-white immigrants, regardless of their status, perhaps even all non-white people, to leave and to go to another country somewhere. Remigration is a proposed solution to another conspiracy theory held by white nationalists called the Great Replacement Theory. This is the belief that a cabal of leftist elites are scheming to use unchecked immigration to replace white populations with non-white populations in order to further their own political power. And it will not surprise you to learn that the Great Replacement theory is where racism and anti-Semitism intersect in white nationalist movements. Because, of course, the Jews are said to be behind it all. And if you remember back in 2017 in Charlottesville, when those white nationalists were marching with their tiki torches through the university and chanting, "Jews will not replace us," that was a reference to the Great Replacement theory. And for more information on that, you can see a CNN article by Chelsea Bailey. And this is all like deeply weird, far-right fringe internet stuff. But the Great Replacement theory is also regularly promoted by Tucker Carlson, formerly of Fox News, and one of the most popular personalities on the right. All of these ideas begin and fester on the extreme right before they cross over to the mainstream. There are apparently limits. And there is a fight going on in the Republican Party right now. That Tucker Carlson recently gave a sympathetic interview to a guy named Nick Fuentes, who is a notoriously racist and anti-Semitic right-wing influencer. And Tucker Carlson's very sympathetic interview touched off this firestorm of protest among more mainstream Republicans like Senator Ted Cruz, who said, "This is a poison, and I believe we are facing an existential crisis in our party and in our country." And I cannot believe that I am agreeing with Senator Ted Cruz, but there you have it. This is a poison. This is from an article by Times correspondent Clyde McGrady called "Nick Fuentes' Rise Puts MAGA Movement in a Time of Choosing." And yet McGrady writes in that same article, quotes Senator Eric Schmidt, Republican of Missouri, who gave a speech before the National Conservatism Conference in Washington. And in that speech, he was lamenting that, in the senator's words, quote, "A few lines in a poem on the Statue of Liberty and 5 words about equality in the Declaration of Independence had led to unfettered immigration and multiculturalism." And the senator went on to say, quote, "We Americans are the sons and daughters of the Christian pilgrims that poured out from Europe's shores to baptize a new world in their ancient faith." End quote. We Americans. Or in the words of the Department of Homeland Security, restore America. Bring her back. We can return. Protect the West. Protect your homeland. Defend your culture. Remember your heritage, a heritage to be proud of. Well, there is a heritage that I am proud of, but it is a different heritage. It is a heritage of values that bids us to welcome the stranger, to care for our neighbors, to celebrate diversity, equity, and yes, inclusion. And it is a heritage that believes that our greatness lies in our invitation to all, to become a part of this shared experiment in liberal democracy. That is a heritage worth defending. And it is up to all of us to defend it. To call out the dog whistles of white supremacy, to refuse to allow white nationalism to be mainstreamed and normalized, especially when it is coming from the occupants of the highest offices in our land. The ideas that they are playing with, whether they believe them themselves or not, are dangerous. Right? The political movements they are encouraging with these sly little winks and coded phrases are dangerous. And we know where this all leads, and we can see the escalating violence of the expression of those ideas happening all around us, and we have to be the ones to say, not on our watch. Not while we have strength to defend the true ideals of our nation, never perfectly realized, but always worth defending. And in that spirit, we might offer back some words of our own, perhaps even some of those few lines from that poem on the Statue of Liberty. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. the wretched refuse of your teeming shore, send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. Blessed be, and may it be so.